favorite chaffinches and sparrows, let's going to continue with our story. We are reading the BFG, and then yesterday we were looking at dreams, a chapter called Dreams. And it was the BFG, the big friendly giant, he was writing the labels of the bottles, of the jars. And then he was writing what every dream is about. So Nosy Sophie wanted to know about the boys' books, about the boys' dreams. So that's where we stop it. So let's see what happened then. Can I read a boy's dream? You can, the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar reads as follows. I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me, as she always does. Yelling, what on earth is you doing up there, walking on the ceiling? And I looks down at her and I smiles and I say, I told you, you was driving me up the wall and now you has done it. It's quite tricky because we know that the BFG, he never went to school, so he doesn't use any full stop. I know, I'm out of breath already. So that's the dream. The boy walking up the ceiling. I find that one rather than silly. Boys wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another ring beller. Perhaps you have seen enough now. Let me read another boy's one, please, come on. The next label said, the telephone rings in our house and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, Simpkins speaking. Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny and he says, what? Who? And then he says, yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me. You is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son. My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat. And then, at last, he is saying, yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir. And he turns to me, and he says in a rather respectful voice, is you knowing the President of the United States? And I say, no, but I expect he is hearing about me. Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, let me take care of it, Mr. President. You will bungle it all up if you do it your way. And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, get up, you lazy slob, or you will be late for school. Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this one. Let me read the next one, please. Sophie started reading the next label. I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mommy comes in and says, where is the child? He was in the bath a minute ago and he can't possibly have washed himself properly. So I say, here I is. And she said, where? And I say, here. And she says, where? And I say, here. And she says, Henry, come up quick. And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air, but of course he's not seeing me. And he shouts, where are you, boy? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, the soap, boy, the soap. It's flying all in the air. Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is invisible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, you is the invisible boy. And I say, now I is going to have some fun. So when I is out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible. and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing, so when people is seen a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people is screaming left and right, and big strong policeman is running for their lives. And best of all, I see my Grammit, my algebra teacher, coming out, Mr. Grammit, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub. And then I is walking up the feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. It was another funny dream. There we are. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them all at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, please. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting, nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is so hooked on it, you can not stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book. And dentist is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airlines pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it too on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest reader the world has ever known until my mommy comes in and says, "I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is all throughs. So is your punctuation?" Oh, I agree with mommy. That's the other dream. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There is billions more, but my arms is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams. I is not having the time or energy to write out long labels. But there is enough to remind me. Can I look at them, please? The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after other one. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazed me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in first place. Ah, said the BFG, I has been wondering how long it is before you is asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an extraordinary sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I is blowing a dream through a window, and I sees this book lying on a little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I is refusing to steal it. I will never do that. So how did you get it? I borrow it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time, I borrow it. How long have you had that? Perhaps only about 8 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? I is reading it hundreds of times. And I is still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Doll's Chickens. Oh, by Doll's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That's all the giants sifling off to another country to castle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie peeped out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past a full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all of us flashbanging to England tonight, answered the flesh lamp eater, as they went galloping past. England is a luckless land, and we is fancying a few nice little English chitlers. I, shout the maid mushers, is knowing where there is a giggler's house for girls, and I is guzzling myself full as a froth blower. And I knows where there is a bogle box for boys, shout the kisser gulper. And all I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra lick squishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. What is Giggle House for girls? He is meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle. Oh no, Sophie cried. And boys from boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do. We is helpless and horse feathers. He sat down on a large, scraggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on her rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until day is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. And next week we will be reading The Great Plan. Let's see what do they do to them giants. That was pictures of today. Okay, have a lovely weekend everyone. Adios.